This is the Diletta Bello, the result of a collaboration between Seattle Coffee Gear and Italian manufacturer Quickmill. It's a classic heat exchanger machine with some thoughtful technical and aesthetic touches based on user feedback. But at the $1,700 price point, there's a lot of worthy competition. So where exactly does the Bello land? And before we get into it, I want to thank Seattle Coffee Gear for sending this machine out for me to review. This video is not sponsored, and the thoughts and opinions expressed are my own. Starting with the outside of the machine, pretty much everybody who I've shown this to loves the look of the powder-coated white. And as someone who enjoys the black and white aesthetic, I also agree. The machine is also available though in black or stainless steel at the same price point. While it's not the smallest heat exchanger out there, I do appreciate that some of the space gets dedicated to the cup warmer, which has plenty of space for different sized mugs compared to some other machines. Accessing the water reservoir feels nice with a hinged lid and foam cushioning to prevent the sound of metal rattling. And for easy cleaning, the cup warmer comes off with no screws. The water reservoir is a hefty 3 liters, however, I found it a bit awkward to remove and replace. There's no satisfying tactile feedback when seating the tank back in, and it does have a bit of a wobble to it even when it's fitted properly. It's a minor complaint that you only encounter when taking the tank out for cleaning, but it's definitely noticeable. Moving to the front of the machine, the Bello gives you lots of information in a relatively small space. While it feels a little cluttered, I do appreciate having an indicator for low water that turns red a few seconds before you actually run out of water. And this saved me a few times from starting a shot only to have it die halfway. As a safety feature, if there is no water detected in the tank, the machine cuts power to the pump and the heating element, which saves your machine but kills your shot. So it's nice to have this warning come a little bit early. The on and off switch is in kind of a tight spot, and even with having loads of experience working in a commercial coffee environment and having pretty heat resistant hands, I did notice the switch itself gets a bit warm after the machine has been on for a long time. I got used to it after a few weeks, but you want to be careful when shutting the machine down since both the group head and the steam wand assembly will be quite hot. One thing that I don't really understand is the need for a heating element light, and perhaps it's for troubleshooting if anything goes wrong, but for day-to-day and general use, I mostly ignore it. Both the steam and hot water taps are insulated, so they are cool to the touch, using a PTFE liner, which is more commonly known as Teflon. Now technically this is a perfectly safe material to use, as steam from the boiler will, at 1.5 bar pressure, reach around 250 degrees Fahrenheit, well below the temperature where Teflon starts to break down. But I know that there's a lot of valid concern out there about this type of material in cooking, and personally, at these temperatures, I don't think it's a problem, but I do think it's important to point it out. And speaking of the hot water tap, it kind of bothers me that it's quite long and can't tuck into the machine while not being in the way of the E61 lever. It can be moved off to the right, no problem, but something about having a water tap outside the drip tray just makes me a little uneasy. And also, if space is a concern, know that it can take up a couple extra inches when moved out of the way. The dual pressure gauge on the front is very nice to have, and honestly should be standard on heat exchange machines. I'll get a little bit more into this later on. The drip tray is a decent size, and the white colorway is actually positive for me because I'm always aware of how full it is, and I'm prompted to keep it clean more often. If you do let it go too far though, be aware that there are 2 magnets along the frame that make it a little tricky to remove the drip tray smoothly. The magnets are meant to hold it in place and keep everything feeling nice and snug, but can be a pain if the drip tray does get very full. Luckily, the magnets are easily removable with a Phillips head screwdriver if you'd prefer not to have them. Speaking of cleaning, the powder coating does clean up very easily with a damp cloth if you get to spills pretty quickly. I've never really had an issue keeping the front of the machine looking good, and it's a relief to not have to worry about fingerprints on stainless steel. You'll probably notice that there are some visible marks on the powder coating, but this is a review unit that has probably seen more movement than it ever would in my own home. Unless you move a lot, I wouldn't be worried about it. Now let's get into the Diletta's performance. When I reached out and asked Seattle Coffee Gear what they were going for with this machine, they said that they wanted to start from a place of familiarity with a classic E61 heat exchanger design and improve on some of the common pitfalls based on their user feedback. And I think for the most part, they've done a pretty good job at achieving that. Opening up the machine, you have a stainless steel insulated boiler, which will get you more longevity over brass or copper. There's also a service port directly under it, so if anything ever happens and the boiler needs servicing, the job is much less labor intensive because the boiler doesn't need to be removed to access the heating element. And while I've never had an issue like this with my Rocket, it's nice to know that you'd be without the machine for less time should you need to send it in for repair. And earlier I mentioned how nice it was to have the dual pressure gauge on the front of the machine. The overpressure valve can be found along the side of the boiler, and while it's thankfully already set at 9 bars out of the box, it's nice to have it fairly accessible if you ever wanted to play around with pressure at the pump. Having the dual pressure gauge around the front makes it easier to dial in without the need for any extra equipment. Now let's get the case back on and talk about how this machine functions day to day. And a quick note while the machine is heating up, I used a bottomless portafilter for all of my testing, but the machine does not come with one. I just did that to make it consistent from machine to machine whenever I test something new. The machine comes with a kind of standard double spouted portafilter and a single spouted portafilter. The machine also comes with a cleaning brush and with a pretty decent tamper, which is pretty nice, honestly, compared to what you used to get, which was a plastic tamp. It feels heavy, it feels solid. It's not the most comfortable shape, but it's nice to have it included. The machine heats up fairly quickly, with the steam boiler coming to pressure in under 10 minutes. I make a lot of hot chocolates in the winter months, and I can definitely appreciate steam being ready to go on a heat exchange machine so quickly. But for espresso, you'll still need to wait about 20 to 30 minutes for the group to be fully warmed up. I put on a group thermometer while testing and found that at 20 minutes, the group gets to around 195 to 200 degrees, and at 30 minutes, it hovers between 205 and 210. Espresso performance is what you'd expect from an E61 machine, with an automatic, mechanically actuated pre-infusion that reduces chances of channeling, helping espresso shots to be more consistent. And the lever gives you some options for manual pre-infusion, which is honestly a bit of a rabbit hole, but if that's something you're interested in, it's available to you. Steaming on the Diletta is very powerful, and it feels almost like steaming on a commercial machine. If you're a beginner, it'll take practice to get used to, but if you're someone with a lot of experience, I think you'll appreciate the steam performance. Now, back to the issue of temperature control. Brew temp on E61 machines is determined passively by steam boiler temp. So as the machine sits, brew temperature will gradually get hotter over time. I don't believe this is a huge issue if you either, one, spend a little extra money on a temperature gauge, or two, just have a good routine with cooling flushes. But it should be noted that at this price point, there are some machines, notably the Elite Maro X and the Perfectec Pro 400, that offer temperature control to help regulate the brew temp. And while I don't think it's a deal breaker for the Diletta, and it's certainly not perfect on the machines I just mentioned, it's still a bit disappointing that there isn't any way out of the box to easily monitor or manipulate brewing temp. But again, if you're the type of person with a consistent routine that can turn the machine on, wait 20 to 30 minutes for it to heat up, make your drinks, and then shut it off, it's probably not something to worry about too much. But if you wait beyond the 20 to 30 minute time window, expect to need to do 5 to 10 second cooling flushes to bring the group back down to suitable brewing temp for espresso. Overall, the Diletta is a well-built machine that is easy to use and performs well. It is a little disappointing to not see some kind of temperature control considering the competition at this price point. However, for me, I don't think it's a deal breaker, and the Diletta is still a solid machine that's worth considering. I have a link down below if you want to check it out, and I'll see you next time.